After the abortion surgery, I returned to Justin's villa. Under the messy bed, the condoms in the trash can were right in front of my eyes. He looked at me with an expression of complete indifference. The morning after pill is too harmful, and Navy's health is not good. I feel bad for her. Finally, I gave up all hope and disappeared completely. Later, I heard that Justin searched through the entire hospital just to see that unformed child. 01. While lying on the operating table, my eyelashes trembled constantly due to fear. The cold sweat on my forehead flowed into my eyes, instantly bringing out more tears. My thoughts were blurred by the pain, and I actually remembered what Justin looked like when I handed him the pregnancy test stick. His pupils were deep and bright, with rippling waves in them. "Nina, you know it's not the right time now." When I was pulled into his arms, his fingertips were still exploring. "We'll have another child in the future." At that time, I clenched my fists tightly until my arms went numb and completely lost sensation before slowly loosening them. A muffled groan came out from my extremely hoarse throat. I stuck my fingers into his thick black hair, and I was almost on the verge of giving up on him. But in a daze, his voice was as moist as the morning dew and mist, soft and lingering. "I'll be able to save enough money to marry you soon, and we won't have to look at anyone's face anymore. I'll accompany you to have the abortion tomorrow. Let's wait until our material conditions are better before having a child." I closed my eyes and let him take whatever he wanted. A sour and panicked teardrop fell and hit his collarbone. Justin's movement paused for a moment, and then a gush of red flowed out. "It won't hurt." He was lying. The cold instruments moved around inside my body without any scruples, ruthlessly scraping off the connected blood vessels. So this was what it felt like to be soberly separated from something. I grasped the scratches on the handrails on both sides hard. My fingertips felt hot, and at the same time, I bit my tongue until the skin was broken. After a long time, I was helped by the nurse to open the door. Justin was already gone from the door. There was a perfunctory voice message left on my phone, with a light and flustered tone. "I have something to do and have to leave first. You stay in the hospital for 2 days for observation." I couldn't tolerate the anesthetic, and the clear pain was nothing compared to how much that message could toy with my heart. Really, it hurt a lot. 02 When I walked out of the hospital, I was haggard and in a trance. I didn't know why Justin insisted that I stay in the hospital. If he really cared about me, why wasn't he here to accompany me? The surgery took away not only that unformed child but also all my love from my youth until now. I thought I would always be with him. It turned out that disappointment could come in an instant. The taxi stopped in front of the villa, and I slowly moved towards the house step by step. At this time, my thoughts were in turmoil. If it hadn't been for taking a lot of medicine due to the severe influenza last month, I really would have wanted to see what our child would have looked like. But probably there wouldn't be another chance. He had never left me alone like this before. The person who used to make a big fuss and send me to the hospital even if my finger was just scratched a little by the drawing paper, how could he be so different now? Was he too busy? But clearly, his career was thriving now, and he no longer had to humble himself everywhere like in the early days of starting his business. I couldn't figure it out. And I didn't want to think about it anymore. I almost bit my tongue until it bled. I raised my hand to wipe away the tears. I was still making excuses for him before, but after seeing that perfunctory voice message, I didn't want to say another word. Girls are born to love. They can turn a blind eye to everything, but when it comes to love, they can't tolerate even the slightest bit of hurt. The dense sting stabbed viciously at my heart. Let's just make a clean break. 03. My knees were bruised, and the pain in my lower abdomen was like being run over by a truck, making it impossible for me to straighten up. I opened the door and went in. There was a hot and spicy smell in the room. Justin lit a cigarette and slumped on the sofa, like a sigh after a romantic encounter. Seeing me come in, he quickly stood up and came to greet me. I couldn't ignore the panic in his eyes. "Who's been here?" I hadn't spoken for a long time, and when my voice came out, I realized that my voice had become so hoarse. The moment I lowered my head, the lid of the trash can in the living room fell off, revealing what was inside. Several used condoms were right in front of my eyes. I froze in disbelief on the spot. Justin had high demands in that aspect and a strong desire. He had always begged me not to use anything. "Nina, you have a cold womb. You definitely won't get pregnant." "What if I do?" "Then give birth to it." "Am I such a big boss that I can't afford to raise a child?" I was stunned on the spot, hanging my head blankly. Tears fell uncontrollably. Yes. The old him would never have sent his own blood away with his own hands. "Nina, you know that Navy's health is not good. She can't get pregnant before you. You'll be my wife." "But the morning after pill is too harmful." "I feel bad for her." I clenched the hem of my pants tightly and huddled up, laughing loudly. While laughing, the teardrops fell, sour and scalding, wetting my cheekbones in lines and patches. "But he also said that he would go against human nature and only spend this life with me. So abortion doesn't harm the body. It's not even half as harmful as the morning after pill." I turned around to run away, but was tightly embraced from behind. "Nina, I'm wrong. It won't happen again in the future." He hugged my waist from behind, but I raised my head and saw my own eyes in the mirror. Those eyes that used to be sparkling like waves were now pitch black, just like two lifeless holes. Justin was very stubborn. If I mentioned breaking up at this moment, he would definitely do his best to compensate me and keep me by his side. My mind suddenly turned, and then I said in a hoarse voice, "Go back to the old house to rest. I'm not feeling well recently and need to take care of myself." He seemed surprised that I didn't make a fuss at all, but he still breathed a sigh of relief. "No, you're weak now. I'll stay here to accompany you." I didn't say anything. Just then, I saw his phone on the sofa suddenly ring. It was a call from Navy. Justin's voice suddenly became hesitant. "There's a dinner party I have to attend suddenly, Nina. I'll come to see you tomorrow. You know, I've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. I can't miss it." 04. Probably he didn't even know how brisk his steps were when he walked away. After packing all my luggage, I realized that I could only take away a small suitcase. All the other daily necessities were related to him. I held back my tears and was just about to leave. Then I heard the phone ringing frantically. "Nina, Nina. For tonight's dinner party," on the client's side. Justin's voice seemed hesitant, but after hesitating for only a short while, he still said, "The client came because of the name of Mrs. Justin. As long as you come and dance, we can sign this contract. I've asked Xiaochen to pick you up." I seemed to be numb and couldn't even cry. I pressed my aching heart expressionlessly. "Justin, do you know that I just had an abortion surgery?" He hung up the phone in a hurry. But I still heard the sweet voice on the other side asking in doubt, "Justin, is sister-in-law unwilling to come?" Her innocent question was drowned out by the hung-up phone. If the client's boss takes a fancy to me, what's the big deal if I dance for him all night for Justin's sake? Sister-in-law is really temperamental. It wasn't until Xiao Chen's car stopped at the door that I finally burst into tears. When I was held by Xiao Chen and the bodyguard on either side, a dark gray Mercedes stopped in front of the villa. A pair of long and firm legs stepped out of the car. He just raised his hand, and several people quickly came out and freed me from the restraint. I held my breath. This familiar smell, the size of the feet, the somewhat familiar deterrence and sense of security. I subconsciously looked up. "Nina, until now, I just want to ask you one question. Are you still going to look for him?" 05. I shook my head. That hand was extended towards me. The fingers were long, the nails were trimmed short and rounded, and the skin color was as cold and white as jade. "Let's go." Victor silently opened the car door for me and closed it neatly after seeing me get in. It was clearly night, but I remembered that year. On the night of my coming-of-age ceremony, I carefully held the gift that I had saved up for a long time to exchange for and stood in front of Victor's door. But there was a female voice inside. "You're responsible. You have to give it a name." I quietly opened the door and through the crack, I saw a hysterical woman. Her hair was messy, her figure was slender, but her belly was bulging mercilessly. Her already swollen hand tightly grasped Victor's sleeve, as if she must get an explanation from him. My head buzzed. The innocent love of a young girl seemed to disappear in an instant and shattered all over the floor. I didn't know how I reacted. I stumbled and ran out of the door. Knowing the power of the Victor family in Gangchang, I went straight to Jingzhou and stepped into a haze. I didn't bring anything except my ID. I just disappeared cleanly from the sight of the Victor family. Many years had passed in a flash. Suddenly, Victor spoke and interrupted my thoughts. That year, you didn't perform well in the exam, but Elder Xing still missed you a lot. His voice was faint and completely hidden in the darkness. When you recover, go and see him. Elder Xing is old. He has only taken you as his sole disciple in all these years. Don't let him down again. I lowered my eyebrows, rubbed the thin calluses on my fingers, and gave a soft mm. He had always been a man of few words, no different from what I remembered. I sat facing the dark direction, lonely. If you want to laugh, just laugh. After leaving the Victor family and you, I've made a mess of myself. Suddenly, he turned me around. His fingers stopped on my shoulders, and they sank in a bit. I was so skinny that my thin layer of skin seemed shiny, as if I would fall over with just a light touch. I let you pursue true love by his side, not to let you ruin your pride. For a long time, there was still silence in the car. There was only the sound of the driver gently turning the steering wheel. The creaking noise stirred a few times. It seemed that Victor didn't expect that I wouldn't refute him. I still hung my head in silence. He laughed at himself. People who study art are all a bit aloof and proud, unwilling to compromise with the secular world. You're so stubborn with me. His fingers rolled up the cigarette box, but seeing my wrinkled nose, he put it down again. Victor let go of me and covered my legs with a blanket. Just stay here at ease. I'll naturally avenge you for any grudges. How dare Justin bully someone from the Victor family? He's really living too comfortably. My nose felt a bit sour, and I suppressed my tears. 06 Over the years, I had thought about how we would reunite many times. But what I least expected was that I would stand in front of him in such a dejected state with injuries all over me like today. In these years, Victor had expanded his business empire wider and wider, and it had already spread to Jingzhou. Now this hospital is probably an industry of the Victor family in Jingzhou. The decoration of the ward I'm staying in is like that of a kindergarten. He still remembered. He remembered my childhood fear of hospitals full of the smell of disinfectant and still sheltered me under his wing. I unconsciously held my breath and touched the lamp beside the bed. A familiar figure walked in. I hadn't seen her for several years, and unexpectedly, her hair had already turned completely white. I looked up with tears in my eyes. The person's voice was weathered, but she still spoke gently to me. Miss, Sir has been busy with something recently. He specially brought me here from Gangchang to take care of you. She lovingly stroked my hair. I knew you still don't like to eat properly. The old woman's hands were washed clean, and her body was filled with the fragrance of soap locust. The lunchbox was gently opened. With a click sound, the delicate fragrance of lotus root porridge instantly filled my nostrils, and my stomach growled uncontrollably. Tears fell into the porridge, and I swallowed it in big mouthfuls. After a long while, Aunt Chen suddenly said to persuade me, Miss, will you go back to Gangchang with Sir? I was stunned for a moment, and there was bitterness in my throat. Which wife can tolerate having an outsider at home? Since I'm an adult, I shouldn't cling to. Aunt Chen reached out her hand, held the plastic tube for the infusion in her palm, and tried to warm up the liquid. Sir has never married. He's been waiting for you. Such words were like a bunch of needles, stabbing densely into my heart. But didn't he have a child, and didn't marry that woman? Aunt Chen put away the lunchbox and tableware. That woman was kept by his father outside. I heard that his father passed away suddenly, and she came to take advantage. She pulled me into her arms, patted me like she did when I was a child, and tried to lull me to sleep. My clenched hand instantly loosened. Her voice murmured, with a gentle ending tone typical of the Jiangnan region, Miss, if you don't go back, he'll really grow old. The emotions entwined in my heart were extremely irritable, making my eyes feel sour. Victor. 07 I was picked up and taken home by Victor. That year, I was 10 years old. It was surprisingly cold in spring, and several spring rains made the daylight seem thin. I wore my mother's black velvet dress before she passed away and listened expressionlessly to the comforting words of the guests who came to offer their condolences one by one. When my uncle and aunt rushed up to demand the debt from me, I stood still on the spot. The cold raindrops hit me. The photos of my parents in the mourning hall were still smiling, completely oblivious to my helplessness, until an adult's palm hit me hard. I growled lowly and grabbed the brazier burning paper money placed in the mourning hall and threw it at them. Amid the screams, it seemed that there were no more raindrops falling above my head. Victor just stood there indifferently, holding an umbrella for me. The people he brought easily subdued my unruly relatives, until he led me into the villa and handed me a letter and a jade pendant. I grasped them tightly, and I did recognize that they were my father's things. Seeing the familiar furnishings and my father's familiar handwriting, I finally burst into loud sobs. Your father asked me to take care of you. Take one more look here, and I'll take you back to Gangchang. That year, he was 18 years old. He spoke in an authentic Cantonese accent, his voice indifferent and distant, but he gave me all the sense of security. The genuine leather sofa, rosewood furniture, and the bookshelves filled with antiques were all covered with white seals. That was my last memory of my home. 08 I didn't sleep a wink all night. Actually, after running away from home, Victor came to look for me. That year, he was 28 years old. He still stood in front of me expressionlessly and said in a rather forceful tone, "Have you had enough of making trouble? If you have, come back with me." That was the second year after I left him. I was working to earn money with my own hands for the first time, and I even supported myself to go to school. When he saw me, I was still squatting in the freezing winter months washing dishes. The owner of the small restaurant never gave me hot water to save money. My fingers soaking in the pool were red, swollen, and burning, and there were sores in some places. Thank you, Mr. Victor. I'll pay you back in the future. He was so angry that he laughed instead. He kicked over the basin of dishes that I hadn't washed yet and they shattered all over the floor with a crashing sound. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist tightly. With what will you pay me back? In his fury, his lips were pursed into a line and his gums bulged. It seemed that he was really extremely angry. Seeing that I didn't speak, he still said, "Are you making trouble with me because of that woman? She's..." I shook him off hard and slapped him across the face without warning, looking at him like a little wolf. Why does Mr. Victor bother to explain to me? I'm just a kid. How am I worthy of hearing about your love history? Victor's head tilted to one side and he was stunned on the spot. Then he took out a stack of money from the inside of his coat and placed it on my work clothes not far away. His steps were urgent and long, and in an instant, he disappeared from my sight. I didn't know that it was a big step he took towards me when he finally recognized his feelings. But that courage was buried in his heart again with the slap I gave him until today, several years later. I gritted my teeth. Victor, you're such a favored son of heaven. Why are you so stupid? 09. My mobile phone vibrated, shaking continuously on the bedside table. I picked up the phone that was about to fall to the ground out of boredom and casually answered the call. Nina, where are you? I'll come to pick you up. The man's voice sounded tired, but there was still a hint of worry in it. I'm wrong. I should have taken good care of you this month. Justin's voice had become hoarse, but you also know that the client is not easy to deal with. You didn't come to the dinner party that day, and they suddenly made things difficult. There are some problems in the company. I didn't feel anything in my heart. Instead, I even found it a bit funny. He could still call me as if nothing had happened. I didn't say anything and suddenly remembered our first meeting for no reason. That year, Justin had a falling out with his family and pulled a group of like-minded friends to start a business. When they were working overtime in the basement, I lived next door to them. Before the mobile game they independently developed was launched, they couldn't decide on the cover for a long time. I volunteered to send them the manuscript I designed. He held it in both hands as if he had found a precious treasure. Soon, I got my first dividend. And I also completely joined their small group. The scene of supporting each other in front of my eyes suddenly disappeared, and I suddenly said, "Someone's putting pressure on you, right?" His continuous confession on the other side suddenly stopped, and the awkward words lingered in my ears. I smiled. "I've put all the gifts you gave me away in the villa. So don't you really know my choice?" I hung up the phone resolutely and threw the SIM card out of the window casually. There was another self-mocking smile on my lips. In the past few years when I was with him, what kind of love spell had I been under? Obviously, I couldn't tolerate any sand in my eyes. I would even go crazy with jealousy when I saw Victor being grabbed by a woman's wrist, but I tolerated Justin having affairs inside and outside the house. Was I more demanding of my sweetheart? Or was it because I was clearly a lunatic? I took a taxi and went straight to Victor's company in Jingzhou. The girl at the front desk of the company looked at me with bright eyes. She then lowered her head to confirm something and nodded repeatedly before leading me into the elevator on the inner side of the company. "Miss Nina, sir is having a meeting upstairs. You can wait in the lounge for a while." It wasn't until I stood at the door of the lounge that I seemed to come to my senses. Justin's phone call just now had filled my mind with thoughts of Victor in comparison, and I rushed over in a fit of anger. But now that I was really here, I didn't know what to say to him. Victor seemed to have deliberately learned the Jingzhou dialect. His voice was steady and didn't drag at all. When it rang out in the meeting room, it made the air pressure in the room drop. I hurriedly turned around and ran downstairs. The sunlight outside was scorching and dazzling, making the exposed skin burn painfully. It was clearly hot, but the coolness rising from the soles of my feet made me feel cold all over. With the mixture of heat and cold, just as my body swayed and stopped by the roadside, I heard a familiar voice behind me, "Nina." I was shocked as if struck by lightning. My body trembled, and I even lost the courage to turn around. For a moment, the sunlight stabbed into my eyes. I unconsciously held my breath and watched that person walking quickly towards me. Victor walked quickly with a gust of wind. The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled up a bit, and the veins on his wrists and forearms were clearly visible under his cold white skin. The hot and dry air stagnated for a moment, entering my lungs silently, making my heart pound and beat abnormally. I couldn't help clenching my palms tightly, trying to make a slightly natural expression. But the muscles on my face were so stiff that they wouldn't listen to me. I felt like an ant thrown on a hot pan, with nowhere to escape. In an instant, Victor had reached me. His hot breath was a bit panting as he looked down at me. I opened my mouth slightly, but no sound came out. However, he didn't give me another chance to regret. He took the lead in speaking. "Why didn't you come in to find me when you came? Where's your unruly spirit?" It was as if we hadn't been apart in these years. My fingers slowly relaxed, and I tugged at the corners of my mouth. "I saw you were busy, so I didn't want to disturb you." Victor's gaze lingered on my face. "Get the marriage license." These two words suddenly exploded in my ears. I didn't react for a moment, and then I heard him say, "Go to your place to get your ID." I stood still, but couldn't resist his almost stubborn insistence. "Let's go." He drove the car himself. The interior decoration of the car was no different from the one he drove in Gangcheng many years ago. Victor had always liked simplicity and dark colors and was extremely nostalgic. He hadn't changed a bit in all these years. "I don't live," the words were on the tip of my tongue, but I swallowed them back. "Let it be." Victor followed me into the hotel. Finally, we reached the floor where I was staying, but he paused and stopped at the door. I quickly blurted out two words, "Thank you." Then I quickened my pace and walked back into the room. Just as I was about to close the door, I saw Victor slip into the room in a flash and slam the door shut behind him. My breath hitched, and I subconsciously took a step back. Suddenly, my wrist was grasped and pinned against the door panel. He moved forward, propped one hand against the wall behind me, and looked at me with a deep gaze. "You've got some nerve, daring to come here looking for a scolding. Nina, you're much braver than before." Victor gave a deep laugh, and his breath sprayed on me. "You ungrateful little wretch. I should have chased after you and strangled you when you ran away. His gaze followed his long fingers and landed on my neck. The thin calluses on his thumb exerted a bit of force and rubbed against the throbbing blood vessels. Suddenly, my voice tightened. I slightly raised my head, still not wanting to be outdone in front of him. Victor had never been so emotionally expressive before, but now he was a bit crazy. He suddenly bent down and clamped my chin. My rationality crumbled bit by bit, and I was taken back to my teenage years. He was so outstanding, being aloof, restrained, noble, and steady. Which young girl wouldn't be attracted to such an excellent young man? With every breath, his scent kept hitting my nostrils. I greedily breathed it in, my heart pounding wildly, yet my words were still unforgiving. It's not too late to strangle me now. After a few seconds of silence, my body suddenly went airborne, and everything spun around. My heart skipped a beat and then started beating wildly out of control. The distance, misunderstandings, deviations, refusals, escapes, pursuits, and flights all disappeared in this instant. 11. Naturally, we didn't get the marriage license. When I opened my eyes again, my face was burning red. The sunlight filtered in through the gaps in the curtains bit by bit. Victor hadn't left and was lying beside me. The man's long eyelashes spread out under the light and shadow, looking incredibly beautiful. I watched for a while, then turned around and got out of bed. But in an instant, I was pulled into his arms by his long arm, trying to run away again. His voice was deep and hoarse, and his arm tightened even more. No way. I turned over, grabbed his suit that he had casually hung on the back of the chair yesterday, put it on, and then felt at ease getting out of bed. I'm going to take a shower. Victor opened his eyes slightly, propped himself up on his elbow and looked at me, then suddenly smiled. What are you thinking? As soon as he said that, my mind was filled with the tussle from last night. After taking a shower, we'll go get the marriage license. I was both angry and amused. Didn't you ever think that I was going to reject you? He didn't care, you seemed more willing than anyone else. I was left speechless, and my ears burned uncontrollably. You old rascal. A deep laugh came from above my head. He turned over and stood beside me, then gently patted my hair. Let's go together. We'll go get the license right after the shower. I didn't respond. The sound of running water started and then stopped. Standing in front of the mirror and looking at my face, I subconsciously raised my hand to tie up my long hair. Nina. He pushed the door open and looked at me from a distance at the door. Suddenly, my nose felt a bit sour. You were right. You said that love shouldn't appear in an artist's life too early, and that your protection would make me lose all my inspiration. I thought of my paintings. Before leaving Victor, I liked bright and flamboyant colors. Everything was magnificent and passionate, and so was my love. In 8 years, Victor had indulged me to be willful. However, I had overlooked the potential love in his eyes. After a long while, Victor suddenly took up the conversation in a low voice. I was wrong. You were just a child back then. I was self-willed and conceited. I knew you were behind the door and deliberately let you see it, but I didn't expect that you would run away so resolutely. He seemed unable to figure it out and let out a long sigh. Seeing you working like a dog outside, I wished I could kill that bastard. Where's your temper with me? Why didn't you fight back? I tentatively walked forward and reached out to hold his fingers. I'm not a young girl anymore. He was silent. After a long while, he sadly reached out to touch my long hair. It's grown so long. You used to love having short hair flying around. You look nice like this too. I lowered my gaze. Let's wait a little longer, Victor. My voice trailed off, and the word uncle that was stuck in my throat didn't come out in the end. 12. I wasn't surprised to see Justin at the Chang'an Club. But I didn't expect him to be like this now. Amid the noise, there were empty wine bottles all around him. I didn't know where he had suffered a setback and had so much sorrow. In the 3rd year when I was with Justin, his company grew bigger and bigger and had already reached an upper-level position among the internet companies in Jingzhou. Seeing that their child was outstanding, Justin's family naturally added some cooperation, and Justin also took the opportunity to return to the family. His net worth naturally rose. But it had nothing to do with me anymore. My thoughts came back, and I let Victor hold my arm as we walked onto the cruise ship. Nowadays, the banquets held by the Chang'an Club are getting bigger and bigger, and the Hainan Rendezvous is also held here. The organizers waiting on the deck saw Victor and hurriedly came up to greet him, their tone rather flattering. The magnificent long corridor was no less splendid than a palace. Even the inconspicuous small corners were extremely luxurious, and the private rooms on both sides had music playing. Pretty young girls were all near the railings. When someone approached them to chat them up, they would go along. They were waitresses in a disguised form. Everyone took it for granted, as if it should be like this. After all, tips of hundreds of thousands were casually given, so they should get some benefits at least. Coincidentally, as soon as I came to my senses, I saw a familiar face hidden in the crowd. The night fell, and the lights were brightly lit. The neon lights emitted by the colorful light poles shone on Navy's face. She looked extremely jealous. She also saw me at a glance. The moment our eyes met, her gaze also lingered on Victor beside me. We didn't get along well in the first place, and now there was even more anger in her eyes. But she was wearing the clothes of a waitress and didn't even have the right to come up to me. I raised my eyebrows and signaled Victor to wait for me in the room. He didn't ask why, took my handbag, and suddenly lowered his head and took my breath away. After a long while, he said in a hoarse voice. With his other hand, he grabbed my hand that was touching his pocket. What my fingertips touched was scorching hot. Victor gave a deep laugh. Don't get lost. I scolded him with a laugh, and then he turned around and went into the room. I took a step forward and walked up to her. Long time no see, Miss Navy. 13. I hadn't seen her for a few months, and she wasn't as arrogant and domineering as before. Before getting on the cruise ship, I had seen Justin, but he didn't bring her with him. First love is just like that. Once you really get what you dreamed of, it will become something as unappealing as the rice stuck to your mouth. The man who had just been beside Navy and wanted to take her away had a bad reputation. I heard that he was a playboy and was really wild, and few people could get out of his clutches unscathed. I went up to talk to her, and that man left because of Victor's face. I squeezed my palm, and the scene of Justin secretly going to see Navy behind my back appeared in front of my eyes. She was so smug back then, and now she was so down and out. Actually, we all knew each other. That year when I ran away from Gangchang, I took several part-time jobs a day, gritted my teeth to take the exams, and paid the tuition for the art college by myself. It was there that I met Navy. She got along well by relying on her looks and figure and got to know many upper-class people. Those young masters took her to meet many teachers, but she didn't have much talent and failed to become an apprentice of any of them. There was a curfew in the school. Sometimes it was inconvenient for me to go to work at night, so I had to rent a basement outside. What I didn't expect was that after I confirmed my relationship with Justin, Navy also hooked up with someone in their circle. Even more unexpectedly, Justin and Navy had been playmates when they were children. It was just that later Navy's family fell on hard times and took her back to Jiangnan. I pulled my thoughts back and looked at her quietly. She had an oval face and phoenix eyes. Except for looking a bit haggard on her face, she was almost perfect. You must be very proud. I pursed my lips and withdrew my gaze from her face. Did you tell Justin that I persuaded you to have the abortion for that child? She froze for an instant. Then she unnaturally denied it. I raised my hand to stop her words. It doesn't matter, Navy. She clenched her hands and the veins on the back of her hands bulged. Justin wasn't a fool. In these years, for my sake, Victor had given Justin many benefits both openly and secretly. He might not have known why he had such good resources before, but after the cover of that mobile game was bought at a high price by a company of the Victor family, he could more or less guess. If it hadn't been for Navy using some words that could stir up his emotions to sow discord, he would never have thrown away someone as valuable as me. After all, I was tied to half of his business cooperation. If there really was something, it was the incident that Navy came to him for help with a big belly that year but had an abortion after seeing me. She had an ectopic pregnancy and was in a very bad condition. At that time, I just thought she was really pitiful. With her consent, I signed the operation form for her and accompanied her to have the operation. But I didn't expect that Justin thought the child was his. I only realized this later when Xiaochen told me about it. It turned out that they had been involved with each other so long ago. I don't know how much sincerity there was in his interactions with me, but I believe that our first encounter must have been beautiful. Since love and interests have become so entangled, there's really no need to be nostalgic at all. All the wasted years were unraveled in an instant. I raised my hand and casually fiddled with the accessories on my ear with an indifferent tone. I originally wanted to see you out. Now it seems that it's unnecessary. Suddenly, she let out a loud scream and shouted at me from behind, I hate you, Nina. You've always been so aloof, but didn't you also do nothing and be Justin's kept woman for several years? What makes you so special? I didn't even stop my steps and immediately left that part of the deck. These people and these things will have nothing to do with me from now on. And I don't need to explain anything to her either. 14 I raised my hand to call the attendant waiter and then realized that the young master just now hadn't left yet. He walked up thoughtfully and asked me, Miss Nina, that woman, I let go of my hand, she has nothing to do with me. When I was about to push open the inner door to enter the inner hall, suddenly there was a pull on my wrist. I was dragged behind the door. The person who came leaned over oppressively, with his nose against my forehead. I smelled the strong smell of alcohol on him. I'm wrong, Nina. I can't live without you. During the days when you were away, I've looked for many people who look like you, but none of them are you. I felt sick for no reason. My fingers, which were stiffly curled up beside me, tightened and I said hoarsely, let go. It was as if poison had been smeared on my heart. This was Justin's belated repentance and true love, but I didn't need it anymore. His words at this moment were like a golden hook, taking me back to the days when I was blinded by love and cutting me until I was bleeding. During those days, my fingernails dug into my flesh every night, but I didn't dare to cry out in pain. I thought that the true love I lost when I was 18 was because of my almost pathological possessiveness. So I forced myself to be sensible and told myself that all men were like that. I could only maintain my dignity and play the role of a sensible fiancé. I knew that I was good-looking, and even Navy was a bit inferior to me. But how could a man's love last forever? Even with all my charm, I couldn't keep him. Of course, being irritable and shouting would only push him further away. But I had already forgotten the days when I could do whatever I wanted. I walked out of that darkness alone. Couldn't I live without love? I took a deep breath and forced back my tears. Did you have a good life with her? The bright lights shone brightly, making the figure in front of me seem illusory. I remembered the passionate Victor that day and how he took the initiative to explain things. It was completely different from when I was 18. During the years we were apart, I had changed, and he had also changed. In a daze, I suddenly interrupted his repentance. Justin, I really loved you sincerely. Don't make me regret this relationship. Don't pester me anymore. His outline was covered by the neon lights, looking so unreal, flickering and mottled, like the first few years when I met him, turning into a magnificent and illusory dream. He still seemed unwilling to give up. I could still hear his heartbeat when I broke free from his embrace. There are so many women in the world, but there's no second Nina. He used to be so arrogant and unapproachable, but he still gave me all his tenderness and almost all his love. But it was also he who betrayed me completely and pulled me out of the fairy tale world. I raised my head and didn't look at him again in the end. I turned around and smiled, with a solemn and serious tone and a final sense of relief. All women in the world are unique. There's no second Nina, and naturally, there won't be a second Navy either. Justin, goodbye. 15 When I returned to the room, I found that Victor was sitting upright by the window, as if he was reading something. But when I got closer, I realized that he was holding the financial magazine upside down. Victor. He pretended not to care and gave a faint still keeping his eyes on the book. I couldn't help laughing. My laughter rang out like silver bells, making his face turn red. Are you afraid that I'll run away with him? Victor didn't laugh, and his breathing slowed down unnaturally. In an instant, he lowered his head, and his slightly warm lips gently touched the side of my temple. Nina, I really can't afford to gamble. I raised my hand and took the initiative to steal his breath away. Victor had changed a lot. Now, with the adornment of the years, he was a bit more steady. The former sharpness and ruthlessness were gone, and instead, he had a bit more gentle and refined elegance of a mature man who had shed all the superficialities. Then let's go get the marriage license. Suddenly, Victor froze. The vision was gradually blurred by the heat, and all the sensations became more real and also more sluggish. The window behind was wide open. The setting sun had completely disappeared, and there was a bright neon light in the deep blue sky. As the night fell, it seemed as if the sky and the earth were upside down. I had nothing to feel inferior about, and I didn't need to have such a strong sense of unworthiness. We had been separated for so long. In the days to come, I didn't want to have any more regrets. Suddenly, my finger felt cold. A purple diamond was set off by his cold white skin and shone with a faint light. Victor's eyes were bright, and his tone was as light as a victorious general's. You really can't go back on your word this time, Nina.